My name is Antonio, and at 32 years old, I always thought I was the reliable son my family could count on. For years, I silently paid bills, covered the mortgage, and postponed my own dreams to keep my parents and siblings afloat. Then came that Sunday dinner when my father stood up, face red with anger, and shouted words that shattered everything I believed about my place in the family. "All you do is take from this family. You've never given us anything," he yelled. What hurt most was watching everyone else at the table nod in agreement, despite knowing exactly how much I had sacrificed. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like button if you've ever felt unappreciated by those closest to you, and subscribe to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of being taken for granted. I grew up in a middle-class neighborhood on the north side of Chicago. My childhood home was a modest 3-bedroom house with faded blue siding and a small backyard where my father Gerald would grill on summer weekends. Those were happier times, before expectations and financial stress changed everything. My parents weren't the warm and fuzzy type. My father worked as a sales manager at an office supply company, coming home most evenings tired and irritable. My mother Diana taught kindergarten at the local elementary school and spent most evenings grading papers or preparing lessons. Both had high expectations, especially for me as the oldest child. My sister Isabella is 5 years younger than me, now 27. Always the charming one who could talk her way out of trouble. My brother Mason, who just turned 24, was the baby of the family and my parents' clear favorite. They never said it outright, but actions speak louder than words. From an early age, I took my role as the oldest seriously. While my siblings enjoyed more freedom, I was expected to set an example. I maintained straight as through high school, joined the debate team and computer club, and still managed to work part-time jobs from the age of 16. First at the local grocery store, bagging items, then at a coffee shop near our house, putting in 20 hours every weekend to save for college. Unlike many of my friends whose parents had college funds set up for them, my parents made it clear that higher education would be primarily my responsibility. "It builds character," my father would say whenever the topic came up. So I applied for every scholarship I could find, took out modest student loans, and worked nearly full-time throughout college to minimize debt. I attended the University of Illinois at Chicago, living at home to save on housing costs. Those 4 years were a constant juggle between maintaining my GPA, working enough hours to pay tuition, and still helping around the house. My siblings, meanwhile, seemed to float through high school with far less pressure and more parental support. After graduating with a computer science degree, I landed a job at a software company downtown. The starting salary was decent, and I quickly proved my value, earning promotions that eventually put me in a senior developer position, earning 6 figures by the time I was 28. Most young professionals in my position would have moved into their own place, started building equity in a home, maybe even begun thinking about marriage and family. But my path took a different turn when my father lost his job 8 years ago during company downsizing. He was 52 at the time, with an outdated skill set that made finding comparable employment nearly impossible. At first, I just helped with a few bills here and there. Groceries one week, the electric bill the next. But as months of unemployment stretched into a year, it became clear that my assistance wasn't temporary. My father took a part-time position at a hardware store that paid barely above minimum wage, and my mother picked up extra tutoring hours, but it wasn't enough to maintain the lifestyle they were accustomed to. 4 years ago, when they fell 3 months behind on their mortgage and the bank sent a foreclosure notice, I stepped in more dramatically. I paid the back payments and took over the monthly mortgage entirely, putting it on auto-pay from my account. The house wasn't in my name, but I was essentially the one keeping a roof over their heads. My financial support didn't stop there. I covered their property taxes, home insurance, and most utility bills. When Isabella's car broke down beyond repair, I co-signed on a new one and made half the payments. When Mason needed money for a coding boot camp he never finished, I gave him $5,000 that was never mentioned again, let alone repaid. Meanwhile, my own financial goals remained on hold. The down payment I had been saving for my own condo kept getting diverted to family emergencies. The trips I planned were canceled when unexpected family expenses arose. Even the relationship I was in suffered and eventually ended because I couldn't fully commit to building a future when so much of my present was tied up in supporting my family. Isabella worked as a part-time yoga instructor and spent the rest of her time building her brand on social media, though her follower count never seemed to translate into actual income. Mason bounced between entry-level jobs, never staying anywhere long enough to build a career. Always with a new business idea that just needed some seed money to get started. Despite their minimal contributions to the family finances, they were treated like royalty at family gatherings. My parents would gush over Isabella's latest Instagram partnership with some obscure wellness brand, or praise Mason's entrepreneurial spirit when he talked about cryptocurrency investments that never materialized into profit. My achievements, meanwhile, were acknowledged with brief nods before the conversation moved on to more interesting topics. The promotions, the client praise, the industry recognition, all seemed insignificant in my family's eyes compared to Isabella's 10,000 followers or Mason's latest get-rich-quick scheme. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was doing what a good son does, supporting his family through tough times, that one day they would recognize the sacrifices I had made. That family comes first, always. But somewhere deep inside, a small voice of resentment was growing louder. Why was I the only one expected to be responsible? Why did my parents baby my siblings well into adulthood while expecting me to carry everyone's weight? Why did giving more seem to result in getting less appreciation? These questions lingered in the back of my mind, but I pushed them away. Family is family, I thought. You do what you have to do for the people you love. Even when it's hard, even when it's unfair. I had no idea how dramatically that philosophy was about to be tested. Sunday family dinners were a tradition in our house, one of the few that survived my father's job loss and our changing family dynamics. Every week around 5 in the afternoon, I would drive to my parents' house, the same house I was now paying for, and spend a few hours with the family over my mother's cooking. That particular Sunday seemed no different at first. It was early April, with spring finally breaking through after a long Chicago winter. I brought a bottle of wine as usual and helped my mother finish preparing the roast chicken while my father watched basketball in the living room. Isabella arrived late as always, making an entrance with stories about a potential sponsorship deal. Mason was already there, having moved back home 6 months earlier after another roommate situation didn't work out. Dinner started pleasantly enough. We passed dishes around the table, complimented my mother's cooking, and shared casual updates about our week. I mentioned a challenging project at work that I had successfully completed, earning praise from the company's CEO. My father nodded distractedly, then quickly changed the subject. The Andersons next door got a new SUV, he said, cutting his chicken with more force than necessary. Must be nice to upgrade your car whenever you want. I took a sip of wine, recognizing the familiar tone that preceded complaints about money. The Andersons both work at that pharmaceutical company, right? They're probably doing well. I used to do well too, my father muttered. Before the economy and age discrimination ruined everything, my mother placed her hand on his arm. Gerald, let's keep dinner pleasant. What's not pleasant about discussing reality? He put down his fork. My car is falling apart. 17 years old, and the transmission is going. Mechanic says it'll cost $2,000 to fix, nearly what the whole car is worth. I chewed slowly, weighing my words. We'd had variations of this conversation many times, and they rarely ended well. Still, I tried. Have you thought about picking up some more hours at the hardware store? Or maybe looking into other part-time options? The temperature at the table seemed to drop 10 degrees. You think I haven't tried? My father's voice took on a dangerous edge. Nobody wants to hire someone my age for anything decent. You have no idea what it's like out there. I'm just suggesting that maybe there are options we haven't explored, I said carefully. There's that new Amazon warehouse that's hiring. Or maybe something remote with your sales background. Isabella jumped in, not helping. Antonio, not everyone can just walk into high-paying jobs like you. Dad has experience, not computer skills. I'm not saying it's easy, I defended myself. But the car situation needs a solution. And I was just offering ideas. Always the practical one, Mason said with a smirk. Some problems need money, not ideas. But you're pretty stingy with that lately, aren't you? That stung. In the past 6 months alone, I had given Mason $800 for interview clothes and paid for his phone when his service was cut off for non-payment. I don't think that's fair, I said, feeling heat rise in my face. I've been helping out a lot. Helping out? My father's voice rose. You make it sound like you're doing charity work. This is family. We're supposed to support each other, and I have been, I said, trying to keep my voice even. I've been supporting this family financially for years. Oh, here we go. Isabella rolled her eyes. St. Antonio reminds us again how much he does for everyone. My mother remained conspicuously silent, staring down at her plate. I'm not trying to be a saint, I said. But it feels like you've all forgotten how much I contribute here. Contribute? My father's face was turning red now. What exactly do you think you contribute? You show up for dinner once a week with a cheap bottle of wine and act like you're doing us all a favor. I stared at him in disbelief. Are you serious right now? Do you honestly not remember who pays the mortgage on this house? Who covered the property taxes last year? Who paid for the new water heater 3 months ago? That's what family does, my father shouted, standing up so suddenly his chair nearly tipped over. And we've done plenty for you over the years. We raised you, put a roof over your head, fed you. You think that was free? You think you don't owe anything back? I felt like I'd been slapped. I never said I didn't owe you anything. But I've been paying back plenty. And all I'm asking for is a little acknowledgement of that fact. That's when it happened. My father slammed his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. His face contorted with rage as he leaned toward me and yelled words I'll never forget. All you do is take from this family. You've never given us anything. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked around the table, waiting for someone, anyone, to speak up, to remind my father about the mortgage payments, the bills, the countless financial emergencies I had solved over the years, but no one said a word. My mother stared at her lap. Isabella examined her nails. Mason smirked slightly, as if enjoying the show. Mason smirked slightly, as if enjoying the show. You're selfish, Antonio, my father continued, his voice slightly lower but still trembling with anger. Always have been, keeping track of every penny like some kind of accountant. Family doesn't work that way. I felt something break inside me. Not just hurt, but a fundamental fracture in how I viewed my family and my place in it. You know what? Isabella chimed in. He's right. You're always holding back, acting superior because you have a good job. But when was the last time you actually helped without making everyone feel like they owe you? Remember Christmas? Mason added. When you got everyone those practical gifts instead of what we actually wanted? So, condescending. The practical gifts he referred to were a laptop for his job search, designer boots Isabella had specifically requested, and a weekend getaway for my parents. Apparently, these were insufficient, and you're always too busy to help with actual work around here, my father continued. When the gutters needed cleaning? Where were you? When the basement flooded? Always an excuse about work or being tired. Each accusation felt more surreal than the last. I had hired professionals to clean the gutters and paid for the basement restoration after the flood. Did they not remember? Or did it simply not count in their minds? I sat in stunned silence as they continued, each family member adding their own grievance to the pile. According to them, I was selfish, cold, judgmental, absent when it mattered, and generally a disappointment as a son and brother. Not once did anyone mention the thousands of dollars I had given them over the years, the bills I paid monthly, the mortgage that kept this very roof over their heads. I looked at my mother, seeking some defense, some acknowledgement of reality. Mom? Do you feel this way too? She glanced up briefly, then back down at her plate. You have become a bit distant, Antonio. And you do make us feel inferior sometimes. That was the final blow. The one person I thought might stand up for me had joined the chorus instead. I placed my napkin beside my plate and stood up slowly. I think I should go. Running away from the truth? My father scoffed. Typical. I'm not running away, I said quietly. I just need some time to think about everything that's been said here tonight. Take all the time you need, Isabella said, with false sweetness. Just remember the family cookout next weekend. Mom and Dad need you to bring the steaks and beer. The expensive kind, not your usual cheap stuff. I walked out without another word, my mind a jumble of hurt, confusion, and growing anger. As I drove home to my small apartment, the one I maintained instead of buying a house so I could keep supporting my family, the reality of my situation began to crystallize with painful clarity. They didn't see me, they didn't value me, and they certainly didn't appreciate what I had sacrificed for them. I barely remember the drive home. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, and I had to consciously remind myself to breathe at every stoplight. By the time I reached my apartment building, my shock had begun morphing into something else, something that felt like clarity. I entered my modest one-bedroom apartment, the place I'd been living for 7 years despite earning enough to afford much better. The furniture was functional but worn, the decor minimal. I had always told myself I was being practical, saving for more important things, family things. Now, looking around at my delayed life, a wave of bitterness washed over me. I went to my home office, a small converted dining nook, and sat down at my computer. I needed to see it all in black and white. I opened my financial management software and began pulling reports, monthly expenses, annual totals, transfers to family members. I created a spreadsheet and began documenting everything I could remember. 4 years of mortgage payments at $2,200 per month. $105,600. Property taxes for 4 years. $36,000. Utilities averaged around $400 monthly. $19,200. Car payments for Isabella. $12,000. Loans to Mason that were never repaid. $22,500. Medical bills when my mother needed dental surgery not covered by insurance. $8,700. The new roof 2 years ago. $15,000. The list went on and on. Small emergencies, regular bills, holiday gifts, family vacations I paid for but sometimes couldn't even attend due to work commitments. The total made me physically ill. Nearly $240,000 over 8 years, with most of that concentrated in the past 4. No wonder I couldn't afford my own house. I had been buying one for my parents instead, but something didn't add up in my records. There were withdrawals from my savings account that I couldn't fully account for. I dug deeper, pulling statements from my online banking portal. That's when I found it. A loan withdrawal from 18 months ago for $30,000 that I had no memory of taking out. I searched through emails and found documentation. A home equity loan on my parents' house, except the application had my electronic signature on it, and the money had gone directly into my parents' joint account. I felt like I might throw up. Had they forged my signature? Used my information without my knowledge? I kept digging. Next, I found credit card statements showing purchases I never made. Designer clothes, expensive electronics, a weekend trip to Las Vegas, all on a card I rarely used but kept open for emergencies. A card my father had access to because I had made him an authorized user years ago when he needed to make some essential purchases during his unemployment. My hands were shaking as I continued my investigation. I pulled up my text message history with my siblings, looking for clues about the unauthorized loan. Nothing there, but I realized I had another source of information. Mason had left his old laptop at my place months ago, claiming he needed me to fix something. I had set it aside and forgotten about it. I retrieved the laptop from my closet and opened it. It wasn't password protected. Within minutes, I found a group chat between Mason, Isabella, and my parents that I wasn't part of. Scrolling through months of messages, I felt like I was watching a horror movie unfold. Antonio won't notice if we use his card for this. He never checks the statements anyway. Just tell him the water heater cost twice what it actually did. He'll pay it without question. LOL, remember when he bought those practical gifts while we used his money for what we really wanted? He's such a sucker. The family ATM that never says no. I feel bad sometimes. But then I remember how smug he is about his job. He can afford it. On and on it went. Hundreds of messages spanning years, all focused on how to extract more money from me, how to manipulate my goodwill, how to take advantage of my love for them. The most recent messages were about the upcoming family cookout, where they planned to guilt me into paying for a vacation to Florida. If he complains, Dad just needs to pull the disappointed father routine. Works every time. I closed the laptop and sat in stunned silence. My entire body felt cold. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a momentary lapse in gratitude. This was systematic, calculated exploitation by the people I loved most in the world. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I paced my apartment, alternating between rage, heartbreak, and a strange sense of liberation. By morning, as sunlight began filtering through my blinds, I had made my decision. No more. No more payments. No more bailouts. No more sacrificing my life and future for people who saw me as nothing but a resource to be drained. But simply cutting them off didn't feel like enough. Not after what I had discovered. They hadn't just taken advantage of me financially. They had betrayed my trust in the most fundamental way possible. They had stolen my identity, mocked me behind my back, and then had the audacity to accuse me of being the selfish one. I needed to do more than just stop giving. I needed to take back what was mine. I opened my laptop and made a list of actions. 1. Contact a lawyer about the fraudulent loan. 2. Cancel all automatic payments for family expenses. 3. Remove my father as an authorized user on my credit card. Nelia. Close joint accounts. 5. Document everything for potential legal action. 6. Explore options regarding the house. The house. That was the biggest issue. Technically, it was still in my parents' names, but I had been paying the mortgage for years. More importantly, I discovered while reviewing documents that when I took over the payments, they had added me to the deed to secure the refinancing. I owned 30% of the house on paper, but was paying 100% of its costs. I made one final decision and added it to my list. 7. Sell my share of the house. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of purpose that had nothing to do with meeting my family's needs. This was about justice, about self-respect, about finally putting myself first after a lifetime of being put last. I sent an email to my office saying I needed a personal day, then started making calls. The first was to a real estate attorney. The following week was a blur of activity as I methodically worked through my list of actions. I took 2 days off work, using vacation time I had accumulated, but rarely used because family emergencies always seemed to take precedence over actual vacations. My first meeting was with Patricia Rodriguez, a financial advisor recommended by a colleague. I brought all my documentation, including the evidence of the fraudulent loan and unauthorized credit card charges. This is one of the worst cases of financial abuse I've seen, Patricia said after reviewing my documents. And unfortunately, it's not uncommon to see it happen within families. She helped me create a comprehensive financial separation plan, starting with the most urgent actions. First, freeze your credit immediately, she advised. Given what they've already done, there's a risk they might try to open new accounts in your name when their access to your money is cut off. That same day, I contacted all 3 credit bureaus and placed freezes on my credit. Next, I called my credit card company and reported the unauthorized charges, removing my father as an authorized user and requesting a new card with a different number. The customer service representative was sympathetic. We see this kind of thing more often than you'd think, unfortunately. Family financial abuse is surprisingly common. I canceled all automatic payments related to my family's expenses, including the mortgage, utilities, insurance, and subscriptions I had been covering. Each cancellation felt like removing a heavy weight I hadn't fully acknowledged was there. My next step was contacting a real estate attorney about the house situation. Maxwell Bennett specialized in property disputes and had extensive experience with family real estate issues. Based on what you've shown me, he said after reviewing the deed and mortgage documents, you have several options. You can force a partition sale through the courts, which would require selling the house and dividing the proceeds according to ownership percentages. Or you can offer to sell your 30% share back to your parents, though that would require them to refinance. What if they refuse to cooperate? I asked. Then we proceed with legal action. It might take longer, but the court will eventually order a sale if no agreement can be reached. I decided to try the direct approach first. I drafted a formal letter with Attorney Bennett's help, outlining my intention to sell my share of the house and giving my parents 30 days to either buy me out or agree to a full sale of the property. The letter was sent via certified mail to ensure delivery. Then, I waited. It didn't take long for the reaction to begin. Within hours of the letter's delivery, my phone started buzzing with notifications. First text messages, then voicemails when I didn't respond to the texts. "Antonio, call me immediately. What is this letter about?" My father's first message, his voice tightly controlled but with underlying panic. "Son, there must be some misunderstanding. Please call us back so we can discuss this." My mother, trying the gentle approach. "What the actual hell, Antonio? Mom and Dad are freaking out." Isabella, always dramatic. "Dude, whatever you think you're doing, you need to stop. This isn't cool." Mason, trying to sound casual, but with an edge of worry. I didn't respond to any of them. Not yet. I needed to maintain the upper hand, and responding immediately would only lead to being drawn into their emotional manipulation tactics. The messages escalated over the next few days. "Antonio, if you don't call me back by tonight, I'm coming to your apartment." My father, now openly angry. "Sweetheart, we're so worried about you. Are you having some kind of breakdown? Do you need help?" My mother, switching to concern for my mental health as a tactic. "You're tearing this family apart with your selfishness. I hope you're happy." Isabella, going for guilt. "Look, man, if this is about money, we can work something out. Just talk to us." Mason, finally acknowledging the real issue. By the end of the week, I had 33 missed calls and 27 voicemails. I listened to each one, documenting them as further evidence of their behavior, but continued my silence. Meanwhile, I moved forward with my plan. I consulted with a forensic accountant who specialized in identity theft cases about the fraudulent loan. He confirmed what I suspected. The loan application contained forged electronic signatures and constituted clear fraud. "You have two options," he explained. "File a police report and press charges, or handle it privately by demanding repayment." The thought of filing criminal charges against my own parents made me pause. Despite everything, I wasn't sure I could go that far. At least not yet. "Let's start with the private approach," I decided. "But I want everything documented in case I need to take legal action later." While this was happening, I received notification from my real estate attorney that my parents had contacted him, demanding to know what was going on. He had explained the situation professionally. I owned 30% of the house and was exercising my legal right to sell my portion. They could either buy me out based on current market value, or the entire house would need to be sold. 2 weeks after sending the initial letter, I received an offer through my attorney. My parents were offering to buy my share for $50,000, approximately half of what it was actually worth based on current market values. "This is insulting," Attorney Bennett said. "Your 30% stake in the house is worth closer to $90,000 based on comparable sales in the neighborhood." I agreed and instructed him to counter with the full market value, with non-negotiable terms including a 30-day timeline for completion. The response was more desperate phone calls and texts. "You're going to make us homeless. How could you do this to your own family? We raised you better than this." I remained firm in my silence. Actions would speak now, not words. 3 weeks after my initial letter, with the deadline approaching and no agreement reached, I took the next step. Through my attorney, I filed for a partition action with the county court, which would force the sale of the house if my parents couldn't buy out my share at fair market value. That same day, I also sent formal documentation of the fraudulent loan to my parents via certified mail, demanding full repayment within 90 days, or I would file criminal charges. It was the toughest love I had ever shown. But looking back at years of exploitation and the cruel words at that Sunday dinner, I knew it was necessary. Not just for my financial health, but for my self-respect and their accountability. The partition filing seemed to be the wake-up call they needed. My real estate attorney received a call from a lawyer they had retained, indicating willingness to negotiate a fair buyout. But before those discussions could progress, everything came to a head in a way I hadn't anticipated. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when the confrontation finally happened. I was working late in my apartment, focused on coding a difficult section of a project, when insistent knocking on my door broke my concentration. "Antonio, open this door right now. We know you're in there." My father's voice, loud enough that my neighbors could probably hear. I considered not answering, but realized this confrontation was inevitable. Better to have it on my terms than to have him causing a scene in my hallway. I opened the door to find not just my father but my entire family crowded in the hallway. My father's face was flushed with anger. My mother's eyes were red from crying, and both Isabella and Mason looked like they couldn't decide between rage and fear. "May I help you?" I asked coldly, blocking the entrance to my apartment. "Cut the crap." My father pushed past me into my living room. The others followed. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I closed the door and turned to face them, keeping my expression neutral despite my racing heart. "I assume you're referring to the legal notices you've received." "Legal notices?" My father's voice rose again. "You're trying to steal our house. You're threatening to press charges against your own parents. What kind of son does that? The kind who's been financially supporting his family for 8 years only to be told he never gives anything," I replied evenly. "The kind who discovers his family has been taking out fraudulent loans in his name and using his credit cards without permission." "That's ridiculous," my mother said. But her eyes didn't meet mine. "We would never do such a thing." I walked to my desk and picked up the folder I had prepared for just this moment. "Really? Then perhaps you can explain these documents." I laid out the evidence one piece at a time on my coffee table. The loan paperwork with the forged signature, the credit card statements showing purchases I never made, the property records showing I owned 30% of the house but paid 100% of its costs, and my personal favorite, I said, opening Mason's laptop which I had kept ready. "The group chat where you all discuss how to manipulate me for money and mock me behind my back." The color drained from their faces as I scrolled through message after message, reading some of the most hurtful ones aloud. "The family ATM that never says no," I quoted. "He's such a sucker." "That's taken out of context," Isabella protested weakly. "Is it? Then please, provide the context where it's acceptable to defraud your brother and son while mocking his generosity." Silence fell over the room. My father, usually quick with justifications, seemed at a loss for words. My mother stared at the floor. Mason shifted uncomfortably, and Isabella examined her manicure as if it held the secrets of the universe. "We've had some financial difficulties," my father finally said, his tone defensive but slightly subdued. "Sometimes families help each other through tough times. Help is freely given, not taken through fraud and deception," I responded. "And it's usually acknowledged with gratitude, not accusations that I've never given this family anything." "You're twisting what I said," my father tried. "No, I'm quoting you exactly. And now I'm doing exactly what you accused me of not doing. I'm taking back my money, my independence, and my self-respect. So you're just going to throw us out on the street?" My mother's voice broke with emotion. "After everything we've done for you, what exactly have you done for me lately?" I asked quietly. "Besides, take advantage of me financially, mock me behind my back, and insult me to my face? We raised you," my father shouted. "We put a roof over your head, food in your mouth. Yes, when I was a child. That was your legal and moral obligation as parents. I've been an adult for 14 years now, and for the last 8 of those years, I've been putting a roof over your head and food in your mouths. The difference is, I did it out of love and duty. You did it because you were legally required to." Isabella stepped forward, trying a different approach. "Antonio, we know you've helped out a lot, and maybe we haven't been as appreciative as we should have been, but this is extreme. We're family. Family doesn't commit fraud against each other," I replied. "Family doesn't exploit each other's generosity until there's nothing left to give. What you've been doing isn't family. It's parasitic." Mason winced at the word. "Harsh, bro. Truth often is," I said. "I've calculated exactly how much money I've given this family over the past 8 years. Nearly $240,000. Money that could have bought me my own home, started my retirement fund, maybe even allowed me to start my own family. Instead, it went to supporting adults who are capable of supporting themselves, but choose not to. We never asked for that much, my mother protested. You asked for everything I had to give, and then took more without asking at all. I corrected her. The unauthorized loan alone was $30,000. Money I never saw a penny of, but am legally responsible for. We were going to pay that back, my father mumbled. Were you? When? And with what money? Since you refuse to find adequate employment and spend whatever you do earn on luxuries rather than necessities, this isn't you, Antonio. My mother tried again. You've always been the responsible one. The one we could count on. What happened to that person? He finally woke up to the reality of how he was being used, I said, and he decided to stop enabling behavior that's harmful to everyone involved, including yourselves. So what happens now? Isabella asked, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. Now. You have choices to make, I explained. The house will be sold, either by all of us cooperatively or through court order. You'll need to find new housing within 30 days of the sale. The fraudulent loan will need to be repaid in full within 90 days, or I'll have no choice but to file criminal charges. We can't possibly repay that kind of money in 90 days, my father protested. You should have thought of that before committing fraud, I replied. But I'm willing to discuss a payment plan if you demonstrate good faith effort. And what does that mean? My mother asked. It means Dad gets a full-time job commensurate with his skills and experience. It means Isabella and Mason contribute meaningfully to their own support. It means all of you acknowledge what you've done and take concrete steps to make amends. This is blackmail, my father sputtered. No, this is accountability, I corrected him. Something this family has been sorely lacking. They stayed for another hour, cycling through anger, denial, bargaining, and guilt trips. I remained calm but firm throughout, refusing to be drawn into emotional manipulation or circular arguments. Finally, when it became clear I wouldn't budge, they prepared to leave. You have 30 days, I reminded them as they headed for the door. I suggest you start looking for new housing immediately. I hope you're happy, Isabella said bitterly. Breaking apart this family just to prove a point. I'm not breaking anything that wasn't already broken, I replied. I'm just finally acknowledging the cracks that have been there all along. After they left, I sat alone in my quiet apartment, emotionally exhausted but also strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I felt like I was standing up for myself, setting boundaries that should have been established long ago. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more confrontations, more guilt trips, more attempts to make me back down. Extended family would likely get involved, taking sides based on whatever version of events they heard first. But I had made my decision, and for once, it was based on what was best for me rather than what everyone else wanted from me. It wasn't selfish to protect myself from exploitation. It wasn't cruel to expect adults to take responsibility for their own lives. It was necessary. For all of us. The weeks following the confrontation were challenging in ways I hadn't fully anticipated. News of our family conflict spread quickly through our extended family network, creating ripples of opinion and taking sides. My mother's sister, Aunt Laura, called me 2 days after the confrontation, her voice tight with disapproval. How could you do this to your parents, Antonio? After everything they've done for you? I explained the situation calmly, including the financial exploitation and fraud. Her response was dismissive. All families have their issues. You don't air dirty laundry like this or make your parents homeless. It's shameful. She hung up before I could respond further. Similar calls came from other relatives who had only heard my parents' version of events, painting me as an ungrateful son, having some kind of breakdown or midlife crisis. But not everyone reacted that way. My cousin Michael, who had always been more of a straight shooter, texted me after hearing the news. Just heard what's going on. Want to grab a beer and tell me your side? Over drinks at a local bar, I showed Michael some of the evidence I had gathered. His eyebrows rose higher with each document I presented. Jesus. Antonio. This is seriously messed up. I had no idea it was this bad. Nobody did, I said. I kept it quiet for years because I was embarrassed. I thought I was just doing what a good son does. Michael shook his head. There's a difference between helping family and being exploited. You did the right thing by drawing the line. His support meant more than I expected, as did similar reactions from a few other relatives and friends who took the time to hear my perspective rather than simply accepting the narrative my parents were spreading. At work, I kept the details private but explained to my boss that I was dealing with a difficult family situation that might require some flexibility with my schedule for court appearances and meetings with attorneys. To my relief, she was understanding. "Take the time you need to handle this properly," she said. "Your work has always been excellent, and we trust you to manage both responsibilities." That vote of confidence helped during the darker moments when doubt would creep in. And there were plenty of those moments. Late at night, lying awake in bed, the guilt would sometimes overwhelm me. Was I doing the right thing? Was I being too harsh? Should I give them one more chance? Then I would remember the years of exploitation, the fraudulent loan, the mocking text messages, my father's words at that fateful dinner. "All you do is take from this family. You've never given us anything." The guilt would recede, replaced by resolve. This wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries and consequences, both of which were long overdue. The legal process moved forward steadily. My attorney filed the necessary paperwork for the partition sale of the house, and a court date was set for a preliminary hearing. My parents hired a lawyer who attempted to delay proceedings, but the judge was unsympathetic given the clear documentation of my 30% ownership and full payment of costs. 3 weeks after filing, we received a notification that my parents had secured financing to buy out my share of the house at the fair market value of $93,000. The funds would be placed in escrow pending final approval of the agreement. It was a positive development, but I remained cautious. My parents had proven themselves untrustworthy, and I wanted everything legally documented and verified. Meanwhile, I had been exploring options for my own future. With the prospect of substantial funds coming from the house buyout and no more family expenses draining my accounts, I could finally think about investing in my own property. I began looking at condos in a neighborhood I had always admired, but previously couldn't afford. As for the fraudulent loan, my parents made an initial payment of $5,000 as a show of good faith, with a formal agreement to pay the remaining $25,000 over the next 2 years. It wasn't ideal, but it was better than nothing, and it spared me the difficulty of pressing criminal charges against my own parents. What surprised me most during this period was how my siblings reacted once the initial shock wore off. Isabella, always quick to judge but equally quick to adapt, was the first to reach out independently. "Can we meet for coffee?" Her text read, "Just us. No drama. I promise." We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop midway between our places. She looked different somehow, less polished than usual, more authentic. "I've been thinking a lot about everything," she began, stirring her latte nervously. At first, I was just angry and scared about losing the house. But then I started really looking at how our family works, especially with money. "And?" I prompted when she paused, "and I realized you're right. We've been taking advantage of you for years. I've been taking advantage of you. The car payments, the random loans, all of it. I never even properly thanked you." Her admission took me by surprise. I had expected more manipulation, not accountability. "What changed your perspective?" I asked. She sighed. "Reality, I guess. When I had to actually look at my finances and figure out how to support myself without your help, I realized how much I'd been depending on you. And then I found an old budget spreadsheet where I'd literally written Antonio Emergency Fund as a line item, like you were some kind of backup plan I was entitled to. It was embarrassing. "I appreciate you acknowledging that," I said carefully. "I've taken some steps," she continued. "I got a full-time position at the yoga studio, manager track, and I'm looking for a small apartment I can actually afford." It was more initiative than I'd seen from her in years. "That's good to hear, Isabella. I'm not asking for anything," she added quickly. "I just wanted you to know that at least one of us is trying to learn from this mess." Mason's reaction was less direct but still noteworthy. He found a job at a tech support call center, his first steady employment in years. He didn't reach out to me directly, but through Isabella, I heard he was figuring his stuff out and trying to stand on his own feet for once. My parents were a more complicated story. The initial fury gave way to a cold distance. They communicated only through attorneys regarding the house and loan repayment. My mother sent a brief email stating they were disappointed and hurt by my actions, but were moving forward as best we can. Reading between the lines, I understood they were adjusting to their new reality, but weren't yet ready to acknowledge their role in creating the situation. By the end of the 4th month, the house buyout was completed. The money was transferred to my account, a substantial sum that represented both financial compensation and a symbolic severing of the unhealthy dynamics that had defined our relationship for too long. I used a portion of it to make a down payment on a condo in a vibrant neighborhood closer to downtown. It was modern, with large windows and a small balcony overlooking a park. For the first time in my adult life, I bought furniture I actually loved rather than the cheapest functional options. More importantly, I began dating again. I met Rachel at a friend's dinner party. A pediatric nurse, with a sharp wit and kind eyes. On our 3rd date, when the topic of family came up, I took a risk and shared a condensed version of recent events. Instead of judgment, she offered understanding. Family dynamics can be incredibly complicated, she said. Setting boundaries doesn't mean you don't love them. Sometimes it's the most loving thing you can do, both for yourself and for them. Her perspective was refreshing, and our relationship developed naturally, without the constant interruptions of family emergencies that had sabotaged my previous relationships. 6 months after that fateful Sunday dinner, I received a letter in the mail. Not an email or text, but an actual handwritten letter on proper stationery. It was from my father. I stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it, both curious and apprehensive about its contents. Whatever it said would mark a new chapter in our complicated history. The letter sat on my kitchen counter for 3 days before I found the courage to open it. Each time I approached it, memories of harsh words and betrayal held me back. But finally, on a quiet Sunday morning, I decided it was time. My father's handwriting was shakier than I remembered. The letters formed with a pressure that suggested emotional effort behind each word. Antonio. It began simply. I've written this letter a dozen times in my head over the past months. No version seems adequate to address what has happened between us. But I need to try. He went on to acknowledge, for the first time, the reality of how the family had treated me. There were no explicit apologies, but there was recognition, which felt like a significant first step. The house feels different without your support holding it up, he wrote. Not just financially, but in all ways. You were the pillar we all leaned on, and we never properly acknowledged that fact. He mentioned finding full-time work at a logistics company, a position that utilized his sales background but required him to swallow some pride and start near the bottom again. My mother had taken on additional tutoring hours, and they were managing, though not thriving. The most surprising part came near the end. If you're willing, your mother and I would like to meet with you. Not to rehash old grievances or make demands, but to begin whatever healing might be possible. Isabella speaks of you often and seems to have found a new path. Perhaps the rest of us can too. He signed it simply, your father, Gerald. I set the letter down and gazed out my condo window at the park below, where families were enjoying the warm spring weather. Children played on swings while parents watched from nearby benches. The simple tableau of family life, with all its complexity hidden beneath ordinary moments. After careful consideration, I texted my mother, suggesting we meet at a neutral location, a restaurant, halfway between our homes. She responded almost immediately with agreement and what felt like genuine gratitude for the opportunity. 2 weeks later, I sat across from my parents in a booth at Malone's, a casual dining spot known for its comfort food. They looked older somehow, the months of adjustment etched into new lines around their eyes and mouths. My mother reached across the table tentatively, not quite touching my hand, but indicating a desire for connection. Thank you for meeting us, Antonio, she said softly. I got your letter, I said to my father, who nodded but seemed unable to maintain eye contact for long. I meant what I wrote, he said finally. Things have changed. We've had to change. The conversation that followed was awkward but necessary. They shared updates about their new financial reality. My father's job was demanding but stable. My mother had taken over managing their household finances, implementing budgeting practices she'd learned from online resources. "We're making the loan payments on schedule," my father mentioned, a note of pride in his voice. "Haven't missed one yet." I nodded, acknowledging the effort that represented. "I've noticed." "Thank you." They asked about my new condo, my job, my life. Simple questions that were remarkable only because they reflected genuine interest rather than seeking opportunities for financial assistance. I shared some details, keeping certain aspects of my personal life private until I could be more confident in this new dynamic. When the subject of Isabella and Mason came up, my mother smiled slightly. They've both grown up more in 6 months than in the previous 10 years. Isabella actually lectured us last week about financial responsibility. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. We didn't directly address the fraud or the years of exploitation during that first meeting. Those conversations would come later, in small doses, as our relationship cautiously rebuilt itself on new foundations. As we prepared to leave, my father cleared his throat. "I know saying sorry isn't enough, but I am sorry, Antonio. For what it's worth." "It's worth something," I replied honestly. "It's a start." Over the following months, we established a new pattern of occasional family gatherings, always in public places, always with clear beginnings and endings. No open-ended obligations or assumptions. Isabella and I developed a closer relationship than we'd ever had before. Her new independence had given her confidence and maturity that made authentic connection possible. She called one evening with exciting news about being promoted to studio manager, and for the first time, she didn't follow up the good news with a request for money to celebrate. Mason took longer to come around. His pride had been wounded deeply by the forced independence. But eventually, he too reached out. Our first one-on-one meeting was at a sports bar to watch a basketball game. The conversation was mainly about safe topics. But near the end, after a few beers, he looked at me seriously. "You know, I was really angry at first," he admitted. "But then I realized I was mostly angry at myself for how dependent I'd become. It wasn't supposed to be that way." "No, it wasn't." I agreed. "I'm doing better now," he said. "Got my own place last month. It's small, but it's mine, you know. I pay for it myself." The pride in his voice was evident, and I recognized it as the healthy pride of genuine accomplishment rather than the defensive pride that had characterized so much of our family's dynamics before. My relationship with Rachel continued to develop, becoming a source of joy and stability in my life. She met my family gradually, in controlled settings where I could ensure old patterns didn't resurface. To my relief, they made genuine efforts to connect with her without the underlying current of calculation that might have existed before. My father, in particular, seemed determined to show a better version of himself. During a dinner where Rachel mentioned a charity run she was participating in, he asked thoughtful questions about the cause and later made a small donation in her name. It wasn't the amount that mattered, but the gesture of giving rather than taking, of supporting something important to someone else without expecting anything in return. 1 year after that devastating Sunday dinner, I hosted a small gathering at my condo. It felt symbolic somehow, inviting my family into my space, on my terms. My mother brought a homemade dessert, my father carried a bottle of wine he had researched to match the meal, and my siblings arrived on time with small housewarming gifts. As we sat around my dining table, the conversation flowing more naturally than it had in years, I realized we were creating something new from the ashes of what had been destroyed. Not a return to old patterns, but the beginning of healthier ones. Later that evening, as everyone was preparing to leave, my father pulled me aside. "I want you to know," he said quietly, "that I'm proud of you. Not just for your success, but for having the courage to break a cycle that I helped create." "It couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't," I acknowledged. "But it was necessary," he nodded. For all of us, as it turns out, those words stayed with me long after everyone had gone. As I cleaned up dishes and reflected on the journey of the past year, I had learned painful but valuable lessons that had fundamentally changed how I viewed myself and my relationships. Setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's necessary for healthy relationships. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling destructive behaviors. Real respect can only exist where there's honesty and accountability. Financial support, without emotional support, creates dependency, not growth. Walking away doesn't always mean giving up. Sometimes it means creating space for necessary change. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that self-respect must come from within. I had spent years seeking validation and appreciation from my family, measuring my worth by their acknowledgement of my sacrifices. But true self-worth comes from living according to your own values and boundaries, not from others' approval. My family relationships would never be perfect. There were still moments of tension, old habits that threatened to resurface, trust that needed to be rebuilt incrementally over time. But we were all making conscious efforts to create something healthier than what we had before. As for me, I had finally created the life I had put on hold for so long. A home that was truly mine. A relationship based on mutual respect rather than obligation. Financial security that came from meeting my own needs before others. And family relationships that added to my life rather than depleting it. The journey had been painful, but necessary. And while I would never wish that Sunday dinner confrontation on anyone, I was grateful for the wake-up call it provided and the growth it ultimately inspired in all of us. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who were taking advantage of your generosity? How did you balance self-respect with family loyalty? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you the courage to create healthy relationships in your own life.